Now to one of the attention-grabbing elements of the Queen's speech this week, a policy taken up by Housing Secretary Michael Gove called street votes. Now, regular listeners may remember this is a proposal we've discussed before on The Briefing, one that has had strong advocates in the think tank world for some years. One of the groups that's been urging the government to take on this idea is the social enterprise Create Streets. They argue for popular, beautiful building and gentle density, and have published papers on the street votes idea. So who better to explain what it actually means than Nicholas Boys-Smith, the director of Create Streets, who joins me now live in the studio. Welcome to the programme. I want to first of all draw your attention to a cartoon on the front page of the Daily Telegraph, the Matt cartoon on the front page of the Daily Telegraph, which people watching on television will be able to see on their screens now. It's a picture of a bulldozer crashing down a house in a street under the title New Planning Rules, and the caption reads, "Everyone in the street voted to knock down your house." Is that what is going to happen?
But you give me the opportunity to say what I've always wanted to say on television, that Matt is the only funny cartoonist, I think, working for the media today. So well done, Matt, who's always brilliant. Rest assured, it is not that. It is not a case-by-case option to, I mean, obviously not knock down houses, but to, for neighbours to police what extension you put up or what conservatory goes at the back of your house, as was sort of semi-reported in the media yesterday. It's not that. The two clauses that are in the draft bill, and your listeners and viewers will be delighted to know I have them written down in front of me here, which I'm going to read, actually. So let's sort of understand what's there. So what it says is the Secretary of State may, by regulations, make provision for a system that permits residents to A, propose development of their streets, and B, determine by means of a vote whether that development should be given planning permission. Now, what that means, it's a framework. The detail will need to follow in secondary legislation. But what that means is that if they wish, no one's forcing them to, groups of residents in a street can put together a visual design code which shows how their plots, how their street could be used a bit more intensively. Depending on the situation, that might be turning garages at the back into a granny flat. It might be adding a mansard story. It might be, in an extreme case, taking, with consent, a series of semi-detached houses and turning it perhaps into terraced houses. It would be subject to strict limits, so you couldn't be overshadowing neighbouring blocks. I think it's very inconceivable, very unlikely that any street intensifying under this process would ever become more than, say, a Georgian terrace street or an Edwardian street. It's hard to imagine that happening without creating light consequences.
I think we can show some of these examples to people watching on television now. Here's an example of sort of some sheds in the back of the street that could be turned into housing. As can be seen there. Now, those listening on radio can have a look at our social media for this. And then there's also the example of building up of a street. Here we go, some low density, I think these might be bungalows on the left, being turned into a lovely Georgian-style terrace. This is the sort of thing that these street votes will allow.
Absolutely. It's and as I say, allow, not oblige. So no one would ever be forced to do this. It would be a collective decision. It would require a supermajority. Case, argument to be had is that 65 or 75 or 85. So it would have to be strongly locally supported. And the reason it's so important, I think, is twofold. First of all, since we created the modern planning system, which is very focused on the sort of development control process, if we own two houses on the same street, Tom, and I get permission to turn mine into a 6-storey building, I gain and you probably lose because I'm going to be looking over your garden and overshadowing your property. However, if we collectively band together to grant ourselves the right to go up a storey or to make it bigger, we all win together collectively. So it gets us off that collective action hook. It turns a win-lose situation into a win-win. And the second reason, if I may just quickly, I can see you dying to get in with another question, forgive me, Tom. The second reason is that the holy grail of creating more homes, and as you know, we desperately, desperately need more homes, is suburban intensification. If you look at the density of what we built in the 20th century, versus what we built in the early 20th, 19th, 18th centuries. It's way, way lower. It's 15, 20 homes a hectare, as opposed to the average 175 in an incredibly popular place such as Pimlico. So if we can find ways to turn the thousands of 20th century streets into something just a bit more intensely decorated, the vast majority don't need to, but if those who wish to can, then the potential for new housing there on our existing urban infrastructure, which is a much greener way to develop, is profound.
And that's really interesting because it's not necessarily talking about horrible big tower blocks. This is about sort of basically Georgian squares and that sort of intensification, that sort of density that Paris, for example, has. I want to explore, however, one of the big problems of our current system of planning, which is how arbitrary it is. How, on a case-by-case basis, you apply for something and whether or not you get along with your local council, whether you know the right politicians, whether you're a big, rich developer, you might be able to push something through. But it's not consistent in a way that would generate a reliable building of houses. These street votes, once a street has voted for a plan, that plan is then there and anyone can build to it, right?
That's right. And just to, and it both gives control but also sets limits. So up to and within that constraint in terms of height, design, you have planning permission. If you want to go beyond that, you need to reapply. The same, the normal system would apply. And that's the beauty of this. It's in addition to the current system. It's not trying to rip it all up and start again. And typically, as you know, and as politicians have discovered over many years, ripping systems up and starting again is not easy. Arguably, it perhaps shouldn't be easy. But just to pick up on your incredibly important point, we do have a very strange planning system in international and comparative terms. And the interesting choice of phrase is often used, which is winning planning permission, which I think is rather revealing. And the consequence of that is that we have one of the most constrained markets for building new homes. We're very reliant on a small number of big companies who are either very good at doing greenfield development in a field or at doing big, complex, very overdeveloped brownfield sites. And our towns and cities are not gently intensifying in the way they used to do, which we turned off.
And this is the great irony, I suppose. Because we have planning permission where neighbours can oppose to things currently, I suppose developers are more likely to want to build on green fields than in areas where potentially development might be better for everyone.
Absolutely. So, I have spoken to many developers who will say, whatever I do, if I can build where there are no neighbours or where the neighbours, again, revealingly, are politically powerless. And it's very striking that, not surprisingly, more prosperous, better connected neighbourhoods, have been much better at opposing development than poorer neighbourhoods. And when the outrageous post-war motorway box was proposed for central London, which I can exclusively reveal was a bad idea, the rich bits of Kensington and the West End were on the whole very good at preventing that happening, and it was in the East End and the less prosperous bits of London that the motorway started to be built. And it was only when they built the Westway that actually popular revolt stopped it, because that got political.
It's really, really interesting. Well, let's hope that this might be able to create some more consistency and less arbitrary rule in these cases. It's a really interesting one, and one we will follow on this programme with great interest. But Nicholas Boyd-Smith, thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you very much.
And talking us through what is an exciting policy.